any system of music, but it's generally our system in India, which uses this term Rakti. So, it's a fairly inclusive, elusive term, is Rakti. It can have so many meanings, so much of different connotations. And when we talk about it, the normal equivalent that is used to explain it in English is aesthetics. Now, if we were to look at aesthetics, that's a totally vast subject by itself, dating back to several thousands of years in various cultures. I'll be trying to cover aesthetics also, but it's still only one part of Rakti. So what really constitutes Raktitvam? Let's just try to see some of these things in a very short 30-40 minutes kind of presentation. We will not be doing more than just surfing the ocean of Rakti, but let's see if we can make that surfing a fairly memorable experience. Is that PowerPoint visible at the back rows as well? You are able to see the things. So most of these questions which are asked are fairly self-explanatory. So when we talk about Raktitvam, now before that I have to make this a disclaimer that today my voice, because of certain obvious reasons, is not in its peak Raktitvam, with a cough and cold and so forth. So I'll try and wade through this presentation with occasional snatches of singing here and there, but some of it could be supplemented by my student Anahita here. So is it ஒருத்தர் ரக்தியா பாடுறார், அவளுடைய சங்கீதத்தில் இவ்வளோ ரக்தி இருக்கு அப்படின்னு நம்ம பேசினா நம்ம என்ன அதில் மீன் பண்ணுறோன்றது நம்மளுக்கு புரியும் and கேட்குறவளுக்கு புரியும். But without any explanation, this term has gained so much of currency that we don't really need to go beyond a point to define Rakti at all. But at the same time, in a talk like this, we are also forced to, lay a grip on the subject. Now, you can see certain things like whether it's an emotional communication or an ornamentational elegance or a certain type of raga, certain genre of ragas, like say Sahana, Saveri, Yadukula Kambodi, Kedara Gaular, Devagandhari, Akiri, so forth. These are all known as Rakti ragas in a classical Carnatic context. And is it tonality and texture or refinement and taste? So there could be another bunch of questions added to this. It will still be good enough to hold all those things, but Rakti would still not be any one of them, but a combination of all of this, and something, as I mentioned there, it's a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. As I mentioned, aesthetics is one of the key contributors of Rakti. An aesthetic sense is a very cultural thing. What we consider aesthetic today in classical Carnatic circles may not be considered anywhere like aesthetic in a pop music or rock music concert, where you really need to have, like giant-sized speakers, blaring heavy metal music happening in a particular way. Only that is like Rakti for them, perhaps. And it's like a totally different yardstick by which they understand their aesthetics. Now similarly, if you were to see aesthetics, it's also a time period wise value system. Now, for example, what was aesthetic? Even in the Western classical music, if you were to take aesthetics in the medieval time versus the time where Beethoven, Bach, Mozart and others ruled, it was quite different from the modern Western classical approach and the post-modern Western classical approach. So it just keeps shifting. That sense of aesthetics keep changing. People challenge aesthetics. All the time there are evolutionary artists and there are revolutionary artists. So the revolutionaries would always challenge the current or past thing and come up with different ideas. Now, for example, the current thinking on aesthetics is that it is more a way of expressing ourselves in any kind of manner. Whereas if you look at Indian music, the whole idea was to induce a special spiritual or philosophical state. Feel it ourselves and induce that. What we have come to explain as Svanubhava. We have to understand and feel it ourselves and then be able to communicate that with rigorous practice and lessons in communication. So that used to be our sense of aesthetics. And if you look at Indian arts, most of them are really geared towards understanding the Almighty in various ways, whether in the macrocosmic sense or the microcosmic sense, and then trying to create that experience to the listener so that there are a few seconds which are created in the hall that can take everybody on the same plane but well above the earth. So that used to be the fundamental approach of aesthetics in Indian art. And since we are anyway talking about that, I'll try and focus a little more on that in due course. Now, as I mentioned, the question of Rakti in Indian music comes from the Ranjakatvam. What some scholars define Ranjakatvam as an ability to create evocative qualities, evocative response, and engage the audience. That is what they mean in that. And if you look at the very definition of Swara, Swayam Ranjate iti Swaraha. So, each note is capable of having Raktitvam provided an artist is able to feel that and be able to bring it out. Now you can see certain geniuses who can just hold one Antaragandharam, they would have brought out that entire Raktitvam within that one note. So it's not even a contextual thing but an absolute thing of just holding one particular note in a particular manner, you can bring that entire Raktitvam in that one note. So many concerts you can see, just one Panchamam. A Madhyasthai Panchamam held beautifully can bring so much of that. So it depends on the artist's ability to feel that. Why are some artists able to do that while some others are not able to is a very big, excuse me, it's a very huge question. But the answer is really a combination of multiple things. Suppose we were to look at artists of the same caliber. Between 10 artists of exactly same caliber, an artist who stands above, head and shoulders above the rest, is one who is able to feel the maximum. That personal feeling, that Svanubhava, that self-experience is what really distinguishes artist from artist. So, all other factors being equal and even, the artist who is able to feel that Raktitvam in each note and able to communicate is generally considered to be a bit in a higher league. And now, I want to touch upon this very unique set of ragas in Carnatic music, the Rakti ragas. Over a period of time, this term Rakti, in fact, if you see musicological treatises before 1700s, you don't even see the term happening anywhere in most of the treatises actually. So, somehow or the other, our whole concept of aesthetics also kept evolving, and our whole concept of ragas itself started getting different, more well-defined, pretty distinct by the time of Venkadamakki and so forth. So at that time, they started classifying ragas based on certain general yardsticks. And one of the yardsticks that they actually found was this separate qualities that certain ragas possessed. What are those qualities? They are not just dependent only on the arohanam, avrohanam or the scale, the mela to which they belong. Now if you look at Carnatic ragas, you can actually talk of various kinds of ragas. Certain ragas which are entirely dependent on their scale as identity. If you say Kadana Kutuhalam, if you look at that entire Arohanam, Avrohanam itself is a signature. It's like you don't need anything more in that raga to actually tom-tom the fact that it is Kadana Kutuhalam. Whereas, if you take certain ragas, like say Chitravina, that Arohanam, Avrohanam is an important part of Chitravina, but at the same time the raga also has certain other features. Now if you see a Carnatic way of handling Chitravina versus a Western classical way of handling the minor scale as they do it, versus an imported version of Hindustani Chitravina, you can see the difference in how they approach this raga. So you have that Carnatic approach where certain key notes are oscillated in a particular manner, but even without oscillating that, you can still call it Chitravina if you just hear the scale. So this is one branch of ragas which is partially dependent on the scale, but at the same time it also allows other gamakams and other things happening. But there are certain ragas like our beautiful things like say Sahana or Kedaragaula, Suruti and others, which you cannot even imagine as scales. So it'll just be a jumble of notes and a jungle of music, but not the raga. So, in other words, they are wholly dependent on certain other things for their identity. And those other things being present or absent really makes them come alive or lay dead. So those are the ragas that we are talking about as Rakti ragas. In other words, those are the ragas which have a totally different definition of aesthetics that is nowhere else paralleled in any other system of world music. This is not an emotional statement. I'm not trying to compare any other system unfavorably with Carnatic or something. But the Carnatic typical aesthetics that we have, certain things that we do to the note, on the note, between the notes, is something that is unparalleled. Now, so on the type of knee, if you do not have, I don't know, turn it off. So I was just wondering where it is coming from. So if you have that particular thing, you will know it is Sahana even without the Arohanam or Avrohanam being rendered. Abdina, you know it is Yadukula Kambodi. You don't need anything more. Just one phrase is enough. You don't need the whole 9 yards happening for us to identify those ragas. So, in other words, those ragas are like wholly dependent on certain other factors than just what you can conventionally call as the technical aspects of Arohanam, Avarohanam and the grammar oriented things that's happening. So those are the ragas that have been put under this basket and called Rakti ragas. And now if you look at this, in many of these cases, the oscillation, glides and grace play a role. In some cases like Riti Gaula and Suruti, it is more the force. Abdina generally, it can only be two ragams in Carnatic music generally. One is Riti Gaula. Can anyone guess what's the other one? Which uses a similar kind of Ninisa? Purna Sharjam. So if you look at those, you can immediately eliminate the other 7.2 million odd ragas and just hone in on just two ragas. It could be one of the two. So that is the amount of distinctiveness that this Raktitvam has. Similarly, if you take Nidap, you can eliminate Kedar Gola. Nidap Magare. Abdinada Kedar Gola. Nidap. அப்படின்னு சொன்னாலே அந்த ஸ்புரிதம் வந்ததுனாலே சுருட்டியாக தான் இருக்க முடியும் அப்படின்ற அளவுக்கு we can be sure, we can be on such sure footing in terms of those awareness of that gamakas, because that is what really is the lifeblood of these ragas rather than just Arohanam, Avarohanam. Now as I mentioned here again, there are certain ragas like Atana, Devagandhari and Yedukula Kambodi which are well beyond the Arohanam, Avarohanam that you will see in the books. Sari ma padasa sadapa magare sa அப்படின்னு ஏதோ புக்கில் இருக்குமா லசனி தப பகதலே அப்படின்னு ரொம்ப மெட்டிகுலஸாக அந்த நீயும் இன்க்ளூசிவாக போடணும் அப்படின்னு சில பேர் ஆர்டிஃபிஷியலாக அதை போட்டு they may bring that thing. Even though Edukula Kambodi rarely uses that except in context of Sanida. Padasa pa magare ma the sari ma அப்படின்னு very distinctive Edukula Kambodi. Anal, how many concerts we see where we just start the raga, and the Sariga அப்படின்றது ஆரோகணத்திலே பார்க்காத ஒரு phrase which we will start. It's not that we are not doing something grammatically wrong, we are not doing anything illegal, nor something that is immoral, but that is the way the raga personality itself is when we have certain ragas. They are like beyond this Arohanam, Avarohanam. Now that brings me to a very interesting, important point. Just because there are some 3-4 ragas like this which are beyond Arohanam, Avarohanam, doesn't mean the entire theory books have to be redefined, entire Mela Janyam system has to be discarded as certain artists seem to be promoting for. That should not be done. These are only exceptions. The exceptions only prove the rule of the healthiness of the Mela Janya system, which is so important for our system of music, which is also a brilliant, unique contribution of Carnatic music to the world music. But these are like very happy exceptions. These are fantastic exceptions which we all love and admire. Then, the other points are pretty obvious in this. As I told, they are not accessories. Nowadays, you see, if you were to buy a car, anything other than the steering wheel and the 4 wheels, everything else is an accessory. But in Rakti Raga, nothing is an accessory. Everything is a key part of the thing. Now, what exactly? We are just getting closer to the center of the topic. Aesthetics is a sense that is essential for Raktitvam. But at the same time, that's not enough, because we still need to be aware of the context of this Raktitvam. Where does the sense of tradition come in when Rakti is concerned? Now, there is a beautiful talk where they even proved that the appreciation of beauty itself is genetic and cultural and hereditary and so forth. Where, there was a fantastic talk where they said that even 10,000 years back, 15,000 years back and so forth, man used to generally as a species love paintings which had a bit of distant mountains with a bit of water flowing over there, some plants and trees happening here and there. So this is like a very generic cultural and genetic kind of appreciation. But there are certain things where contextual things also come into play. Now, we have to be aware of the tradition here in Carnatic music. We have to see what ragas have what kind of oscillation, what kind of things. So we should have listened to a lot of that. And then of course, how do we bring it out? We can have all the Raktitvam inside our head, but how much of it actually comes in the voice or in the hands is something that we have to really work hard. There is no running away from the fact that we need to work hard to get anything. எனக்கு நேச்சுரலாக சரஸ்வதி தேவி டான்ஸஸ் பண்ணிட்டாங்க, சும்மா நான் அவளுக்கு அப்பப்போ சான்ஸ் கொடுக்குறேன், அவள் வந்து கொஞ்சம் ஆடிட்டு போயிடுறா அப்படின்ற லெவலுக்கு we can't be thinking when we get on the stage. We should really do a lot of homework. This is as demanding, as detailed, as intrinsic and as intricate as your nanotechnology or space science or medicine or anything. So the same kind of hard work is needed to get the same kind of dividends. A doctor or engineer works average 10 to 12 hours per day. We cannot expect to work half an hour per day and then say, I'm very talented, you know. It just comes naturally. So the returns will be only parallel to that half an hour kind of work that's happening. We may be thinking we are like, you know, next to Narada or something, but the reality will be something else. But when we work hard, we get that Rakti happening in the voice. To even make Rakti happen, a lot of voice culture is also required. There are a bunch of students here, that's why I'm actually making this a slightly a freewheeling kind of speech, because I want the students to get the right perspective here. Do not go by a thought that there is no voice culture required for Carnatic music. That's a totally wrong thought. Number two, do not also think that you need to import voice culture from Western classical or voice experts from the Hindustani or something, because those are separate systems which have their own unique voice culture requirements. That is not what is necessary for Carnatic. Many times, if you are actually training your voice like a Western musician and try to bring that to Carnatic, it's actually going to be anti-Carnatic many times. Carnatic voice requires certain things. It has certain unique things where you have the plain notes, oscillated notes, fast, slow, and different kinds of dynamics happening all the time. So it has to be constantly changing. In Hindustani, you have the time to sit, and every note you can sit and make your voice warm up as you sing the raga alapana. Carnatic, you don't have the luxury. Many times you have to just get into the alapana fully warmed up. You can't imagine such a start happening in Hindustani normally. You have a lot of different. So in other words, their voice culture requirements or the voice requirements of a pop artist or something will be totally different. But Carnatic requires a lot of voice culture. Only then you can really get the Rakti happening in your throat. Same thing with your hands. We understand the Raktitvam fully in our brain, but is it coming in the voice? So it still needs a lot of hard work for it to actually translate. So when we are talking about this, and you can see the second point is more just a small touch with good perfection is Rakti, but if it is without that perfection, the touch will be minus T. That's what it will make the audience feel. Now, having learnt all these traditional things, we still need to develop taste. And taste again is all these are fairly tough terms to keep talking about, but when we talk, people understand it. So, what happens is, when we are talking specifically about it, we should be able to have a good taste of how to give the voice. How to give voice, how to create silence when it is required, even while singing a note. That's one of the highest levels of music. Rakti is not always only suggestive music. ரொம்ப ஞானமாக பாடுறார் சார் அப்படி நிறைய பேர் வந்து பாத்ரூம்லேயே பாடுவாங்க ஞானமாக ரொம்பவே நானே நிறைய பேர் வீட்டில் தங்கியிருக்கேன் பியூட்டிஃபுல்லாக இருக்கும் அவன் பாடினான் ஆனால் that is not all. We still have a lot of grammar also that is required to be conquered, and so we need to know certain things. We have to see how we can do those things. And then, as I said, this dramatizing will not be considered Rakti, but it's a part of art. I'm not saying that is wrong art or something. Art actually includes suggesting things and dramatizing certain things. That is absolutely fine. As long as they are in the right proportion, it's fine. Probably science is the only one where you have to make a virtue of stating everything straight. In science, it's not a virtue to be dramatizing or just only suggesting certain things. You have to actually be factual in science. But whereas in art, if you are merely factual, you'll be pretty staid. You still need to suggest things. You have to show imagination. You should show create that imagination and anticipation and the excitement happening in the audience as well. So it's fine to dramatize once in a while, but that will not be so much of Rakti. It's more like a Brahmip kind of thing. Whereas Rakti, you have to be suggestive. And then, restraint is one of my favorite terms always. That restraint is the hallmark of refinement. Understating things. Understating not like you just don't know anything more, so ஏதோ தெரிஞ்சு ஒரு ரெண்டு நோட்டீஸ் ஸ்டேட் பண்ண அப்படி கிடையாது. எல்லாம் தெரிந்து அதை எதுக்கு இந்த ப்ரொபோர்ஷனில் ஸ்டேட் பண்ணுறோம். And that is something that comes how அப்படின்றது the future slides will show. Now here I am actually getting down to some examples. Sari ga ma de ni da ma ga re ga ma ga re sa da sari ga ma pa da. இந்த நல்ல ஆர்டிஸ்ட்லாம் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா பஞ்சமத்தை ஒட்டியே தான் அந்த தெய்வத்தமோ பிரதிமதிமத்தோ பாடுவான். எப்பாவது ஒரு கான்ட்ராஸ்டுக்கு that is not the default ma that they will be using all the time. If you have a panchamam, this is something that I call as the law of gravitation of sa and pa in Carnatic music. The sa and pa really pull all the notes closer to them, and especially the notes which are very immediate to them are bound by that gravity. And refined artists understand this theory of gravitation very well, and they'll be able to execute it beautifully. இப்போ வந்து நல்ல then second sangadi இதெல்லாம் வந்து next type of sangatis. இப்போ is not at all wrong, but my Guruji Brindama would generally come towards that pa just before she will go to the next phrase in that. And abdin paduava. Small microscopic touch, but still there is so much of aesthetics and Rakti in that kind of approach. அப்படின்னு பாடுத அங்கேயே தான் பாடிட்டு இருக்கோம். அப்படின்னு நாயக்கில் பாட மாட்டோம். நீ பஜனகன அப்படின்னா ரொம்ப கேட்கறதுக்கு ஒரு பிரைட்டா கேட்குமே தவிர ஆனால் தப்பு அது. In the context of Nayaki's Raktitvam. நீ பஜனகன ரசிகுல. So that is the beauty of the Raktitvam in the raga specific sense. So if you look at I already mentioned Spuritam in Retigola and all that. Now if you take even Re and Revati for instance, even though Revati Re can be almost sung like a Vedic chant. The kind of thing is absolutely allowed in Revati. Certain times a mild oscillation happening there, or say Hindolam for instance. It's a different sense of approach of aesthetics over there in that Hindolam, but so this is considered to be an imported raga from Hindustani Malkauns, whereas Carnatic is supposed to have had more of the Shuddha Hindolam, but whatever it is, it still has that Carnaticity happening once we have imported it. And then same thing with Hamir Kalyani for instance. Kind of thing. Again, we have to be very careful about how to do that. So many ragas which have been important to Carnatic music, like say Dvijayavanti, Hamir Kalyani, all this, even Behag, and all this have now developed Carnatic Raktitvam, which an artist has to be aware of. I'm going to just skim through the next few points because of the time constraints. And then you can see phrase-based Raktitvam. Certain ragas like Hussaini, Apdina, and the next phrase, Padwa, Apdina, almost any artist who is exposed to that Hussaini will be aware of that. We can always do a twist as an interesting exercise. But there are certain times spent that phrase-based Raktitvam really plays a dominant role in certain ragas. Now again, but அப்படின்னு கொஞ்சம் ஒரு ட்விஸ்ட் அங்கே கொடுத்ததுன்னா அது வந்து அந்த ரக்தித்வம் adds to that one. Thodi Kalyani, so many examples where the பா வர்ஜ்யம் பண்ணி சில phrases பாடுதோ இல்லை சர்ஜித வர்ஜ்யம் பண்ணி சில phrases பாடுதோ ரொம்ப அழகாக இருக்கும். And then காலப்பிரமாணம் and then pronunciation has to have Rakti too. The pronunciation வந்து அப்படின்னு ஒரு மாதிரி ப்ரொனவுன்ஸ் பண்ணிட்டுனா அது ரக்தித்வமே இருக்காது அதுல. We have to work on these things. I'm saying this because especially students have to work on these things. Otherwise sometimes even when they grow into 60-70-year-old veterans, they might have missed out a lot of these things. Then there are certain phrases which we should be aware of our voice texture or our instrumental capabilities or our instruments things. What can sound good on one instrument? Now, for example, a Rajaratnam Pillai kind of genius could make even a plain ni or plain ga in Todi sound Rakti on that instrument. Whereas if you have a Veena artist playing like that, Gamadani, அப்படின்னு தோடி வாசிச்சதுன்னா ஒரு வீணையில் வந்து அது அவ்வளோ ரக்தியாக கேட்குமா அப்படின்றது நம்மளுக்கு திங்க் பண்ண அனலைஸ் பண்ணி we have to take a call on that. Now, இவ்வளோ ஒரு intimidating topic Ravikiran is talking about, but is it all that difficult? We can actually gain Raktitvam as we progress as musicians. How do we do that? Listen to a lot of refined artists, learn a lot of compositions in Rakti Ragas. Each Rakti Raga, if you were to really put a list, I don't think it's more than 30, 40, 50 Rakti Ragas in Carnatic music. And in each one of them, if we try and shoot for an average repertoire of at least 10 songs or so, that will really give us a fantastic feel. And this 10 should include Bharanams, Javalis, Padams. If wherever possible, if there is a Padam, go for it. learn it. Just doing Padam will give such a fantastic voice culture also. Whether you're going to sing it in a concert or not, it's one of the best way to get that raga insights, especially from a school like the Brinda school or something. And then, a lot of things happen by discussing. One of the major ways in which I benefited was through my interactions with the legends like, say, Samangudi Mama, Brindama, or MS, or DKP, or all these fantastic artists. Just spending time with them, and at that time we have to always remember that we have 2 ears for a purpose and only one mouth as well. So that is very important. We should not talk at that time, listen a lot. And then we have to introspect a lot. We have to internalize all that is said. A lot of things has to go. It's like what I call as a 24-hour non-stop channel should be happening in our brain, parallelly to whatever we are doing. That should still be happening all the time. That happens, then we are able to get some glimpse of this art over many, many years. And now comes the next part of it. While I have said it is possible to gain it, it's also possible to lose it. How? If we actually, don't forget to read the final point as well. Thank you all very much. Great pleasure.
Friends, I must deeply appreciate Sri Ravikiran, not just for the lecture, but he has come from a very stressful overseas trip just day before yesterday, and he has kept my word. I mean, the word he gave to me to present this lecture. A lot of work has gone into it, as you can see. And of course, his usual crisp, concise presentation with a lot of valuable takeaways for all the students here, as well as the audience we have online. So on behalf of all of you, Ravi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed your presentation, and our thanks also to Kumari Anahita. And the next concert by Sri Ramakrishnan Murthy, we will start in about 5 minutes. Please have a quick cup of coffee and come back. He will be accompanied by Sri Vittal Ramamurthy, Sri Manoj Shiva, and Sri Anirudh Atreya. Thank you.